Hello, I'm Super Orange Cat here. I'm today talking about the seventh episode of season 2 of Made in Abyss that was released last night on Toonami. So I'm going to give you some of the thoughts of some of the things I liked about this episode, some of the things I didn't like about this episode, and then tie up with a big old Super Orange Cat bow at the end. So the one thing that really stood out to me as the best thing this episode was the concept around what happened to Itamui, or let's just say Fupuda. I might say her real name a few times, but Fupuda is much easier to remember for me, so I'm just going to call her that, since we already know she turns into Fupuda at the end of all this. So, Fupuda. So at this one point, everyone is gravely ill. I'll go into why a minute later. She's gravely ill too, and they found, and part of the group found this egg that's known as the Cradle of Desire. And the only way this can be wielded by a child. So they think Itamui, or Fupuda, will probably wish for her own health or health of everyone else there. So Vueko gives her the egg, or the Cradle of Desire, and it's like, okay, she's gonna wish for everyone to be healthy. So then Vuko wakes up the next morning and Itamui is healthy. However, her arm is still messed up, and she slowly transforms into this being that effectively gives birth every other day. Now, here's the reasoning behind this. And people think, oh, that's just weird imagery. Well, it makes a lot of sense, actually. And the reason why is, if you remember, Itamui, earlier in this episode, confides to Vuko and it's like, talks about how she was kicked out of the village for not being able to have her own children, since they imply the society is very matrilineal, which means what matters most is the bloodline of the mother. So, considering that she was the only daughter of her mother and she herself cannot have kids, then it's treated as if she was the dead end in her family line. So she must be some unholy monster. So they're going to quote unquote cast her back into the pit in which she came from. That's why she was abandoned, confides this to Vuko. And from there, Vuko becomes more or less a surrogate mother to Itamui. So the innermost, deepest desire of Itamui was not to be healthy. It was to correct the one thing in her life she felt was ostracizing her, and that was her inability to have a child. Note that Itamui is a young child herself, so she doesn't quite understand the full implications of childbirth or the full implications of raising a child. So she just sees it as giving birth physically out of you of something that you want, but not understanding that it's its own human living being and that you must feed it or that it must grow too. So she gives birth to these rabbit things that don't have internal organs, that can't eat, that can't drink. So naturally, they just die the next day. It's a lot of the whole, and also why are they rabbit forms? Well, if you remember early in this episode, Itamui had her own pet rabbit. She saw babies as, oh, cute little things. What's a cute little thing she had recently? This rabbit. So she saw the babies as rabbits. And it's kind of like what you would do if, like, a 6-year-old tried describing you, like, where babies come from, would be more like, oh, they come out of the mommy, and, like, they're cute. And they're not explaining, like, the whole 9 months gestation period, the fact, well, it's apparent that it's painful to Inamui because you hear her scream, and that wakes up Vuko 2 different times we see in this episode. But it comes out of you, and oh, it's cute, and he doesn't like understand the whole implications of this is a whole human being you have to raise. So one, she doesn't even see it as a human being in a way. She sees it as something that's cute. And she doesn't understand that it's its whole thing. So she imagines it as almost like you would imagine like a doll in a way. But dolls aren't real. You don't have to feed dolls. You have to feed babies. So it's this whole thing where she has to now, instead of getting this blessing, which naturally one would should consider childbirth, it becomes a curse. And note how one of the common theses or motifs of Made in Abyss has been the interchangeability of blessings and curses. So instead of getting this blessing of, oh, she can have children now, it's more the curse of you're cursed to give birth every other day just to see your own child die in front of your eyes, which turns from the physical pain of having her limbs slowly mutated to just the psychological pain of going through any mother's worst nightmare over and over and over again. And that's something I think the show did a really good job of. And I say this because I don't think the show really did a great job of the rest of the episode. So really, this episode just felt like plot contrivances the episode to me. For example, you have the whole water source thing where it's like, oh, okay, of all these water sources, the only one we can realistically go to is this one. And no one realizes until like the third time they go in there that you're inside a carcass the whole time that was full of parasites in the water because it's like the innards of some giant creature in the abyss that's dead. And even Vuko, at least to give her credit, she's the only one that seems to think any of this out to any degree. She's like, wait, we have to boil the water first, but apparently it doesn't work here. And even they try to explain this away of like, Vuko's like, but we boiled all the water. And like the head guy's like, well, this abyss just keeps throwing surprises at us. It just felt like they're trying to describe away a whole plot contrivance of, yeah, Vuko, we're trying to make sure that she's actually intelligent and she knows what she's doing despite being kind of shy and demure. But it's not going to be enough because everyone's going to get sick. And another contrivance is the order in which people get sick. It just felt more like a contrivance. And they don't even explain this to any real degree. How the last people to get sick happen to be the three main characters. Like, Vuko happens to be the last one to fall ill. Belov, the white hair, spiky boy, just kind of fucks off at one point. It's past 6 minutes, I can say that word. And, like, we don't see him. Although we do kind of see him a couple times when, like, Itamui's confiding to Vuko or having this clear surrogate mother and daughter moment where he's like looking ominously. Where normally, if it's like a normal anime, it would be like, oh, he secretly has feelings for Vuko. And maybe this will be a cute little reveal later that he actually loves her and he'll save her. She saves him at some point. But considering Toonami already spoiled what he becomes, and knowing what he becomes, it has a suddenly darker meaning. And also, the fact that the main head guy never gets sick. And at the end of the episode, they do something that would have, if the episode, if not the episode, if the whole season revealed things in different order, what would be a great cliffhanger, which isn't really cliffhanger because we know that happens, is the ending where he's like, he fed her soup that had meat bits in it, and he told that he fed everyone else the same, so everyone's getting better. And then he turns and says, well, I told you that girl was going to save us, which on its surface will imply, oh, he just killed Itamui and fed her remains in a soup to all the people to get her healthy because she had the cradle of desire, and the cradle of desire would make everyone else healthy because everyone's innermost desire at that moment would be to become healthy again. Well, we know that's not exactly what's going to happen because she has to be alive because she becomes Faputa. And we definitely see Faputa in the actual current timeline. So we know it's not that. So it's either two realistic possibilities for me. One, he just like cut off her limbs and tortured her or something, which honestly, considering this show had a full-on arc in Dawn of the Deep Soul about torturing kids, very realistic, very plausible. Or second one, he just took all of the dead rabbit babies, and considering, well, technically it's her blood running through her veins, and her blood probably has the magic from the cradle of desire, that they were going to make them healthy too. And what I expect to happen is, since you already know Vuko probably does something to cradle desire that messes everyone up, what I think will happen is that since they realize that their survival is based on Itamui, not just as a guide, but by basically eating her body in a way because she's the only food they know is a safe source right now. And this will frustrate and anger Vuko because, again, as far as she's aware, this is her surrogate daughter. She deeply shows throughout this episode, she deeply cares for Itamui, and we know that Itamui deeply cares for Vuko at this point. So she's going to be in a position where she just can't bear the fact that her own survival is 100% dependent on the suffering of Itamui. She will snap and will do something that will basically grant her freedom or immunity, and that causes her to turn into Faputa, which is the ultimate embodiment of value. Since, again, we already know she's the embodiment of value right now for the Ganja Suicide Court. Again, I can say that word because we're 9 minutes in. Because she's the one reason why they're alive. So she becomes the embodiment of value in the future. And as you remember from the previous episode, the episode ends with Reg going out to seek Faputa, basically to collect anything from her to sell at the market for the high value so they can bring back Nanaji. And again, it's kind of predictable. It wouldn't be a bad plot. It's not a bad idea at all to have Vueko, who's this kind, loving character who, if you didn't know already that she already said, I screwed everyone over, you would think, okay, there's no way she would do anything. If anything, it's going to be Belov. And maybe that's another curse of the weird ordering of events here where they tell you how things end with the plot, that plot line, before actually showing it. It would be better for them to have had this episode earlier, like maybe like right the episode after it ends where you see Vueko chained up, and imply in a way that Belov screws over Vueko in the end to basically become the leader of the Ganja Suicide Corps because the old guy, the prophet, can't do it anymore or something. And then have the surprise be, oh, Vueko actually screwed everyone over the end to protect Itamui from Belov. Because again, we know Belov in the future seeks value, he hogs value, and he is the reason right now where indirectly why Nanachi is currently dead. So we know this is a dark character. And Vueko sees this at the last second and makes a big sacrifice, that being the rest of the Suicide Corps, just to save Itamui from them. Because again, deep care because she's basically her daughter at this point. That would be a better way to write this. And again, the ordering of events kind of screws them over here. And another thing that kind of screws this episode over, which is not the show's fault, it's not the manga's fault, and it's not even really Toonami's fault, is the fact that this happens to be the episode that led off Made in Abyss in the new year after 2 weeks off. Like, if I didn't just mention how the previous episode ended, you might have forgotten. And again, it ends with Vueko starting to tell the story, and at the very end saying, "Oh, Itamui, should I tell about you?" Before, I guess this is the plot device to be like, "Oh, she's telling this right now to Riko, the woman in charge of like the cafe, and Majikaju, who we now are aware aren't part of the original group. They're just other hollows that showed up there sometime later." So, and again, and this was just, it's not a bad episode. It's just definitely one of the weaker ones. You could make an argument this is the weakest Made in Abyss episode so far. Although a couple of the very early ones, and episode 8, I believe the one where Riko gets stabbed by the Orc Piercer in the first season, are contenders too to being the weakest episode. And none of those episodes I would call bad. But this one definitely is a relative low light. And again, these characters don't come off the page to me in the way that Riko, Reg, and Nanachi have. And I really think that this next episode's probably going to at least cover probably the fall from grace of Vueko, how she ends up getting chained up in Goo Prison. And again, it's so hard to merely keep focus on a main story if you have episodes long excursions into a different story, especially if that story isn't really as interesting as the initial one. But ultimately, again, this wasn't a bad episode. It was just a step down. If I had to rate this episode, I'd give it a 6 out of 10. What do you guys think? Leave your comments, leave your opinions down below. I am the Super Orange Cat, and that is all.